Broadcasting from the Hip Hop Weekly studios, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Civic Cipher, where our mission is to foster allyship, empathy, and understanding. I'm your host, Ramses Ja.
He is Ramses Ja. I am exhausted, but not like sleepy exhausted. I'll explain more later in the show, but you guys can call me Q.
Indeed. I know what he's referring to because we had to put together today's episode, and we know what is coming your way. So buckle up because we want you to ride with us while we discuss a question. I think we should frame it sort of like maybe when do black people's rights kick in? You know, in this country, we're big on our rights. You know, we're Americans, you know, so
when do they kick in or do they kick in?
Either one. Because
I'm not sure they do kick in, right, according to some of our fellow citizens.
Yeah, and so we're going to go through a few recent examples that really shows how different of an experience that we have when it comes to our rights and what we're entitled to as citizens in this country. In the second half of the show, we're going to be discussing some high-profile executions where there have been some doubts that have had to be considered, or
that should have been considered.
Right. Well, based on our position, they absolutely should have been considered, and they were not. And as a result, there are people who are no longer alive because they were executed. And we're taking a look at the systematic exterminating of human beings. Whether or not that's immoral is irrelevant. The thing is, we're asking the questions, does this happen if, you know, a couple of things are different? And our position is that it's not likely that it does. But before we get there, we like to start off on a high with some ebony excellence.
Shall we?
I think we shall. Want me to take this one?
Sure.
All right. Today's Ebony Excellence is sponsored by Actively Black. There is greatness in our DNA. Visit activelyblack.com. I'm going to share with you from Afrotech. What if your garment pieces could communicate how you feel? Kenyan inventor Roy Alela answered that question and provided an accessibility solution with his smart gloves. Alela is the brain behind Sign.io smart gloves that give the hearing impaired and deaf the ability to communicate with people who don't know sign language, according to Africa.com. Alela was inspired to create the technology after needing a method to communicate with his then 6-year-old niece who was born deaf. Sign.io uses Bluetooth to connect the product's app. With this technology, flex sensors placed inside the gloves on each finger can quantify the bend of a finger and process the letters being signed. The glove's creator believes the power behind them really rests in the speed at which the signs are vocalized. Quote, people speak at different speeds, and it's the same with people who sign. Some are really fast, others are slow. So we integrated that into the mobile application so that it's comfortable for anyone to use it, end quote. Alela continued to the outlet. The gloves can also be customized to fit different colors and themes, such as Princess or Spider-Man. The glove has a 93% accuracy in language, gender, and audio pitch. It goes on to say, it fights the stigma associated with being deaf and having a speech impediment. If the gloves look cool, every kid will want to know why you have them on. With the brand success, Alela plans to get his product in schools across Kenya to assist with learning and accessibility equity for hearing impaired children. I kind of love that. Obviously, it's ebony excellence, but it's also doing some good in the world and making the world more accessible, which is something that, you know, we can get behind pretty easily here. All right, so yeah, when do black people's rights kick in, or do they kick in? I think that's probably an even better way to ask the question, but we're going to share some stories with you. These all come from the Black Information Network, which, you know, full disclosure, Q and I are a part of the Black Information Network, but, you know, we cover these stories and share these stories with our podcast, the Black Information Network Daily Podcast. And we noticed a theme in recent stories, and the theme again had specifically to do with whether or not a black person's rights were violated. So these aren't necessarily instances of police brutality, police shootings, police killings, but rights, like the dignity that comes with, or the dignity that should come with being an American citizen, that often does not accompany stories when the person at the center of the story is black. I'll start so that I can give you an idea of what we're talking about with this first story, again, from the Black Information Network. A Canton, Ohio police officer has been fired after he was caught on video kicking a black man in the chest while he was kneeling on the ground with his hands raised. According to News 5 Cleveland, Brandon Mamarov was fired earlier this month following an investigation into the arrest of 21-year-old Jamir McElroy. Video taken by a bystander showed Mamarov running toward McElroy and kicking him in the chest as he appeared to comply with police orders. Police previously said they were responding to reports of an argument last month when officers encountered McElroy. According to the police, multiple people, including one individual alleged to be armed, fled the scene when they arrived. However, suspects, quote, appeared to be complying when Officer Brandon Mamarov kicked Jamir McElroy in the chest, unquote. The department previously said in a statement McElroy and 2 other men were arrested on suspicion of obstructing official business and resisting arrest, according to a report. At the time, Police Chief John Gabbard defended the officers' actions. Quote, our officers frequently face stressful, dangerous situations and confrontations with armed suspects. Police Chief John Gabbard previously said, quote, their dedication to the community has resulted in exceptional reductions in violence, especially gun violence, over the past 2 years, unquote. So I think the reason that this one stood out to me was because there was such an emphasis on the fact that he was complying with the officer's request. And in theory, if you're doing what a police officer asks you to do, the police officer then does their job. If they assault you, if they kick you in the chest while you're on your knees with your hands raised, that is a violation. And what else stood out to me was, of course, the police chief's initial position, again, to like defend the officer kicking him in the chest with his hands raised. And ultimately, as we know, the officer was fired. And I know that we talked about this a bit, but kind of, let our listeners know a bit about when you first read this one, what was going through your head.
Well, my initial thoughts are not unique to this story. And again, why I had us rephrase the question, do black people's rights ever come into account in stories like this? With the ever-present cloud of qualified immunity, police officers kind of get to break the law all the time, as long as someone can say, well, that's what they had to do their job. They were stressed, they were afraid, and the list goes on of reasons that they come up with to justify these behaviors. In cases like this one, the absence of video would almost always mean that they can do whatever they want. And you and I spoke before in another story, sadly another similar story, that whenever there is absence of video, the punishment for that should be severe. Because in most of those cases, it's not because something malfunctioned. It's because the cameras were turned off, because officers
or obstructed intentionally,
because officers know they're going to do something wrong. They plan to do something wrong. They want to do something wrong. And in cases like that, I don't have the data in front of me, so don't quote me. More times than not, the person who is on the receiving side of these violations looks like you and I. And the reason why I'm so confident in saying so is because we would see it all the time if it were the opposite. Those who want to pretend racism doesn't exist and throw it in our faces, those who want to minimize the idea that black people are treated any differently, especially in the negative skew, and even those who think, quite frankly, we deserve it, would love to have examples to the contrary, to show us, to prove their point. And the fact that those almost never come up, is all the evidence that I need to feel how I feel. I'm not making a scientific argument. This is just an observation.
That's what we want. The thing is, over the next couple of stories, it's less about feeling and more about a pattern. So let's add another story.
Please.
This also comes from the Black Information Network. A lawsuit has been filed on behalf of the family of a Georgia man who was shot by police officers who entered his home without a warrant. Okay, so this again back to violating a person's rights. Right to privacy, a right to police do need warrants in this country, and you have a right. You're protected from search and seizure, unlawful search and seizure, etc. If I'm not mistaken. All right, so he was shot by police officers who entered his home without a warrant. The family of Mirando Salmon filed a federal lawsuit last week alleging that Salmon's constitutional rights were violated during the deadly warrantless search of his home on November 4, 2022, 11 Alive reports. Officers entered Salmon's home without a warrant amid an investigation over a car that was stolen from a dealership. Police spotted the alleged stolen car in Salmon's driveway, which was believed to have been taken on a test drive from a dealership a week before and did not return or pay for it. That, according to the lawsuit. Officers knocked on the front door and entered the home after no one answered. DeKalb police officer Russell Mathis encountered Salmon sitting on his bed in the dark. Mathis shot and killed Salmon in a matter of seconds. District Attorney Sherry Boston said Salmon threw a phone at Mathis, which the officer believed was a knife. Phones and knives. They look similar to you?
Okay, so obviously no, but I'm going to take a few steps back to try to be fair.
Yeah, break it down.
Of course they don't. But in the dark, who knows? Yeah. In the dark, the phone could have been a gun. Okay. In the dark, the phone could have been any weapon. And you justifiably have that position where you're supposed to be in this person's house.
Yeah.
But because you were not, you're an intruder and it's dark and this person is afraid. And if this person had taken the extreme position that, the Back to Blue people want to pretend that they honor, and that's the right to bear arms, then he'd be justified in having shot that officer who he believed to be an intruder in his home in the dark.
Oh, yeah.
So it does not even matter if it was a knife. Why are you in my house? Why are you in my bedroom?
Yeah.
Who are you? Yeah.
You have a right to bear arms. So
I mean, we're talking about black people's rights, because black people apparently don't.
And that's
the presence
when
of a weapon
Yeah.
tends to justify us being shot.
Yeah. You're making the point I was trying to make. That's
whether or not the phone looked like a knife or looked like a gun or a baseball bat or a crowbar, none of that matters. Someone's in my home in the dark who I didn't invite here and who legally has no right to be there. I should be able to defend myself.
Yeah.
So the argument that you thought I had a weapon, completely irrelevant.
You know what?
I'm sitting on my bed in the dark and you're in my house and I don't know who you are.
Sometimes you amaze me because I'll pitch it and then you swing for the fences and you get a home run. It's amazing. I love it. I do want to go back just a bit though, because sometimes people I believe have trouble empathizing when they hear, well, what did he do? The car was stolen from a dealership, blah, 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 this, that, and the third. And I want to make sure that we, again, are examining rights in this country, and we are breaking down the rights of all the citizens, or at least what rights all citizens should enjoy. We don't know that the car was stolen. We don't know if the dealership had wronged him. We don't know if he had wronged the dealership. We don't know this because he never had his day in court. He's dead now. So for people to say, well, he shouldn't have had the car, and then the police wouldn't, not that we don't know these people, but there are people out there who will defend the police officers, as you mentioned, no matter what.
In this case, though, I don't even want to extend him that benefit of the doubt. Right? Say the dealership say the car is stolen, and it was. And it was all the way wrong. And it was parked in his driveway, and he stole it. You still don't get to enter this man's house unannounced without warrant and kill him. So again, the same with the phone, and then he thought it was a knife. Okay, say it was a knife. Say it was worse than a knife. Say he had a katana sword. You are still a warrantless person in his home. You're not an officer there to carry out some duty that you have.
Some official, function.
He stole the car. Okay, get a warrant. Present yourself as an officer and give this person a chance to not make himself a victim of the crime you already know you want to commit.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we have to take it back to. You enter without a warrant on purpose. And in the dark, you can justify the crime you want to commit by pretending you're the one that's afraid. How about that? You entered my home unannounced and you're scared of me. You entered my home without the legal steps that you were supposed to go to, but you're the one that's afraid of me in the dark, in my home, in my bed. So, I don't even want to extend the benefit of the doubt that he didn't do anything, because you don't have to be innocent of a crime to not deserve to be killed in your home, in your bed.
Or to be afforded due process.
Correct.
Right. Now, that's number 2. Allow me to continue with number 3.
And we have so many more of these.
Yeah, these are just, rule of threes, right?
We just don't have enough time.
So this also comes from the Black Information Network. And this one, I know Q's going to love it, because when we were talking about it before, I kept telling him, don't say anything, wait till we turn the mics on. So now the mics are on. I'll paint the picture, and then Q's off to the races. The black pastor arrested while watering his neighbor's flowers is suing 3 Alabama officers who he alleges violated his 4th and First Amendment rights, CNN reports. Pastor Jennings was detained and booked into Talladega County Jail in May after a neighbor who deemed the pastor, quote, suspicious, unquote, called the police as he was watering flowers at another neighbor's house who was out of town. Viral video of the incident shows police handcuffing the Alabama pastor in his neighbor's yard with a water hose in hand, despite Jennings explaining the situation to officers and a 3rd neighbor vouching for him. Jennings said he verbally identified himself to police during the incident, but officers didn't believe him. The pastor didn't have physical identification with him at the time of the encounter and refused to retrieve it, he said. Okay, now before you go, I know you're ready. Let me paint the rest of this picture, because the BIN had a follow-up to this story. What happened was, as I mentioned, this pastor was asked by a neighbor to take care of his garden. Can you water my garden while I'm out of town? Pastor says yes, a black pastor. The pastor then goes to the house, waters the garden while the neighbors are out of town. Another neighbor in the neighborhood calls the police saying, hey, there's a black man in this yard. He doesn't live there, blah, blah, blah. Police show up. He's still out there taking care of the friend's garden, the neighbor's garden. The police ask him who he is. He identifies himself. I'm a pastor. I live right there. This is my friend. He has to take care of the lawn. The police are like, okay, well, now you need to go physically get your ID or somehow produce your ID. And the pastor says, I don't have my ID. This is not, I'm not out in public. This is where I live. And I suspect that it got contentious at that point. That's not the part of the video. Later, the officers arrest him for not showing his physical ID. Okay. That turned into a nothing burger. But the fact of the matter is that this pastor was embarrassed and humiliated and, inconvenienced and all these things, right? We're talking about rights. This isn't a murder case, which I know we covered a lot of those. Now, originally he files a lawsuit, the pastor, against the police. And the courts throw out the lawsuit because of, as you mentioned earlier, qualified immunity. These police were executing they were functioning in the capacity of their job description, investigating a potential crime, whatever. So qualified immunity protected them from being liable and being held accountable. The thing is, this pastor appealed that decision, and ultimately the appeals court ruled that in Alabama, officers can stop you. They can ask you to identify yourself and what you're doing. But there is no law that says that officers can demand that you show them physical identification. And because that was the point upon which this entire case rested, the appeals court allowed this pastor to continue with his lawsuit because indeed his rights were violated. Now, that's the story as far as we've gotten with it. We're still following it, of course, but now the floor is yours, Q. Talk to me.
I hope that if you can hear my voice, you can understand the frustration from the very beginning of the story. A neighbor called the police on their neighbor for watering their neighbor's plants. Like we told that part of the story fast, but I have to rewind. You say a third neighbor came out to vouch for this person, which means the person that called the cops could have been the voucher as well. They see the person that's doing it and they see what they're doing. So I'd go on to guess that the suspicious part
is the black part.
Was this part.
Yeah, the skin.
For those who can't see me, I am rubbing the skin on my hand. The brown or black part was the suspicious part. There's nothing about holding a water hose, seeing the water come out of it onto the plants that's suspicious in any way, even if you don't recognize the person. Oh, my neighbor hired a landscaper. That's why he has a water hose in his hand and is watering the plants, right? So we start there. And I'm frustrated telling myself the story in my head so that I can talk about it. Then the police arrive. And as an officer, part of your job should be to show up and notice a crime isn't being committed. Right? Because me hiring a landscaper while I'm not present does not mean my landscaper is trespassing. If you get there and this neighbor is looking in the windows and looking and or actually acting suspicious besides being black, I get it. But when you, officer, arrive and see that there's a water hose and he's watering the plants, even if you're curious, you should have now, turned off your I have to arrest somebody today circuit in your head. The presence of another neighbor vouching that this person lives here and is doing this favor for me. There's so many things that happened before he got placed in handcuffs and arrested and had to file a lawsuit that only happened because he's black.
Thank you. And
accusing us of race baiting or playing victim or whatever you people do. Sometimes just be a human being and hear this stuff and realize that if it was you or somebody you cared about, that you would think it's ridiculous. But because it's me and I look like me, you don't.
Well,